Hi, I'm Jerry Chidiak. I'm a high school teacher in Prince George, BC. I teach several courses that address genocide, including Social Justice 12, Social Studies 10, and a locally developed course in our school district called Indigenous Identity 8. There's a lot of misunderstanding in the world as to what genocide is. So I teach my students about the 1948 UN Genocide Convention. To teach them how genocide happens and how it can be prevented, I find that Dr. Gregory Stanton's 10 stages of genocide is incredibly useful. These documents, the Genocide Convention and Dr. Stanton's 10 stages of genocide, are the focus of this presentation. At the end, there will be space to ask questions so we can cover any important topics I've missed and to continue our learning experience. The only internationally recognized legal document that defines the crime of genocide is the UN Genocide Convention. I will be focusing on Articles 2 and 3. You will note that it says nothing about how many people have to be killed or how they are killed. Also keep in mind that this document was a compromise. Raphael Lemkin, who coined the term genocide, wanted to include political groups, for example, but the Soviet delegation would have none of that. Article 2 states, in the present convention, genocide means any of the following acts committed with the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such. The word intent is of course very important. Intent has to be proven in order for the charge of genocide to be applied. A. Killing members of the group. B. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. E. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Keep in mind that Canada and other settler colonial countries were reluctant to ratify this document. They knew, of course, that forcibly transferring children from their homes to residential schools was a common practice here. So let's take a look at Article 3. Despite the fact that this document became law roughly 75 years ago, it has not been applied to any great extent. There has simply not been the political will to use it. And that has had a devastating impact on our world, where millions of people continue to suffer from the crimes of genocide. Is that going to change? Good question. So, Article 3 states that the following acts shall be punishable. A. Genocide. B. Conspiracy to commit genocide. C. Direct and public incitement to commit genocide. E. Attempt to commit genocide. And E. Complicity in genocide. What does that mean? Very good question. In 2012, renowned genocide scholar Dr. Gregory Stanton summarized how genocide happens. In the 1990s, he published the 8 stages of genocide, but felt that these didn't show the full picture. Note that the act of genocide that most people think of is stage 9, extermination. If we are going to prevent genocide, we need to not only know what it is, but how it happens, and hopefully how it can be prevented. Here are Stanton's 10 stages of genocide. Classification, symbolization, discrimination, dehumanization, organization, polarization, preparation, persecution, extermination, and denial. Stanton's 10 stages of genocide offer a fantastic lens to use when looking at a world where genocide and other crimes against humanity are unfortunately so prevalent. There are several points to keep in mind, however. First, all 10 stages can be happening at the same time. Therefore, the word stages tends to create some confusion. Elements may be a more appropriate word to use. Also, I do not teach a course on genocide. There is a course offered through the BC Ministry of Education called Genocide Studies. I teach Social Justice 12 with a genocide focus. Why? Because all violations of human rights, all acts of social injustice, are steps toward genocide. We classify people as different and we discriminate against them. Persecution and extermination do not happen unless there is dehumanization. Therefore, preventing dehumanization is key to preventing genocide. Denial, lying, assaulting truth, gaslighting, is extremely prevalent in all other elements of genocide and is therefore central to genocide prevention. The rest of this presentation will primarily focus on dehumanization and denial. Classification, symbolization, and discrimination lead to dehumanization. What is dehumanization? It is seeing individuals as something other than human, and it is extremely dangerous. The target group is described as terrorists, vermin, diseases, perverts, deplorables, snakes, enemies, and many other words that one cannot say in polite company. It is a good thing, actually, that many words have become socially unacceptable. That shows we are making progress as a society, but we still have a long way to go. Despotic leaders always choose random groups to dehumanize, whether these despotic leaders embrace left, right, or no particular political ideology. Normally, the groups targeted and dehumanized are already vulnerable members in a society. After one group is attacked, the despotic leaders can easily add other groups to target. We need to recognize that colonialism is built on dehumanization. Europeans in particular dehumanized people of color and looked upon themselves as superior. As we know, this led to genocide. Dehumanization is not murder, so most do not recognize the danger it poses. Dehumanizing hate speech can be disguised as free speech or as an opinion. Organization, polarization, preparation, persecution, and extermination cannot happen unless the target group has been dehumanized. Most of us have a natural sense of empathy. Therefore, the other has to be dehumanized before ordinary people will tolerate persecuting or even executing their neighbors. In stages 1 through 4, it is not so difficult to turn around the genocidal process, as we shall see. Once the genocidal process moves to stages 5 through 9, however, it is much harder to stop. To prevent dehumanization, we must recognize it and respond effectively. We need to vigorously protest the use of dehumanizing language. When extremist politicians use dehumanizing language, it must be called out by the press and by moderate politicians. There must be consequences for these politicians. For example, voters should not vote for them. We also need to prosecute hate crimes. We need real consequences. For example, in our schools, students hopefully know not to use racist language because there will be consequences. On a positive note, we need to humanize other people. We can promote tolerance in the media and in education. We use sports and the arts to promote our common humanity. There is an amazing musical movement called Playing for Change. They combine the work of musicians from all over the world to create amazing art. We need more of this. We also need to place economic and diplomatic pressure on countries where the government practices dehumanization. Finally, we need to recognize the tactics of denial in dehumanization. What are the tactics of denial? We see them all the time, especially in the earlier stages of genocide. Those who consciously or unconsciously promote genocide will attack the truth tellers. They may not be terrorists, but they are supporters of terrorism. They claim that dehumanizing language is protected as free speech. They deny or minimize the evidence or the statistics. They tell outright lies. In Mein Kampf, Hitler wrote that people will more easily fall victim to a big lie than to a small one. And they continually repeat untrue catchphrases like, immigrants are taking your jobs. And finally, they gaslight. They deny the reality that others can clearly see. In the latter stages of genocide, génocidaires will deny genocidal intent. They will call it war. Turkey, for example, continues to deny the Armenian genocide more than 100 years after the fact. Génocidaires will also blame the victims. They will claim that the actions do not fit the legal definition of genocide. They will claim that calling it genocide will harm current interests or alliances. During the Cold War, for example, there were many genocides, but neither the pro-American nor the pro-Soviet side wanted to call out their allies. And finally, génocidaires will claim that they are the actual victims. This is often accompanied by angry yelling or an indignant, "How dare you say that?" How do we prevent denial? This is really the main reason why genocide education is so important. This is why I teach about genocide in my high school courses, write articles, and make YouTube videos about genocide. We need to understand and call out the tactics of genocide. We need to incorporate genocide education in the curriculum of every high school. We need to incorporate genocide education in the media through podcasts, articles, films, etc. We need to arrest and put on trial all perpetrators of genocide. We need to document the facts about the genocide and publish them. We need to hold truth and reconciliation forums. We need to make genocide denial illegal. In many countries, including Canada, Holocaust denial is illegal, as it should be, but we need to go far beyond that. For example, many of our own politicians deny the reality of Canada's genocide against Indigenous peoples. That in itself is dehumanizing and perpetuates the impact of genocide. We need to focus on dehumanization as a prelude to physical genocide. We do not exterminate people whom we humanize. If we see genocide as the enemy of humanity, we need to put into practice the lesson of the Chinese philosopher Sun Tzu. We need to know ourselves. We need to embrace our humanity and live it to the fullest. We also need to know the thought process and the tactics of the génocidaire. If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. If you know yourself but not the enemy, for every victory gained, you will also suffer a defeat. If you know neither the enemy nor yourself, you will succumb in every battle. I may be a dreamer, believing that a world free of genocide is possible, but I think this viewpoint gives us our greatest hope in creating that world. We have thus far failed to prevent genocide. I believe that this is because we do not understand the thought process of extreme evil. Stanton's theory outlines how the process of genocide happens, whether its perpetrators are conscious of this thought process or not. If we can predict what genocidaires will do, we can more easily and effectively counter their actions. But genocide can only be prevented if we focus on truth and humanizing our neighbors. This presentation was originally made for an online social studies teacher workshop. If you are attending a workshop with me, I will take your questions now, and I hope we don't run into any technical difficulties. If you are watching this video on YouTube, please put your questions in the comments. And of course, observations and insights are also appreciated. Thank you very, very much for your time and for sharing in this learning with me. Peace.